it isn't possible to divide a number by a decimal. So the first step we have when we're trying to divide by decimals is that you have to change that decimal, the divisor, into a whole number. Now the process we use when we change a number, a decimal number, into a whole number is that you're actually multiplying by 10 or by a power of 10. It depends on how many decimal places you have in your number that we need to change. So the shortcut we use is often to look at this number and say, okay, I need to move this decimal point one place over to make it a whole number. So instead of 3 4/10, we've changed it to be 34. And the way we've done that is we multiplied it by 10. 3 4/10 times 10 would give me 34. Now, whatever power of 10 we use to multiply this number by, we have to multiply our inside number, or our dividend, by the same amount. So if I multiplied 8 84/100 times 10, essentially what would happen is my decimal point would move one place to the right. So the shortcut that we use often says, well, just figure out how many places you have to move the decimal point outside in your divisor and move your decimal point in your dividend the same number of places. Okay, and that's kind of the rule that you need to follow whenever you're dividing by decimals. Once you've done this, what we have now is a whole number on the outside, 34. We still have a decimal on the inside, but we can now just divide like we normally would with whole numbers. Okay? So my first step is going to be to look at this and say, how many times can 8 be divided by 34? Well, 8 can't be divided by 34, so we're not going to put anything in the place value spot above my 8. But what I'm going to do is I'll look at this as an 88 now. 88 can be divided by 34 2 times. 2 times 34 gives me 68. And my next step is that I need to subtract. So when I subtract 88 minus 68, I get 20. My next step in division is that I need to bring down the number that's left, which is a 4. So now I have 204. And I need to think about how many times can 204 be divided by 34. And the answer is 6. So above this 4, that's where I'm going to put my value of 6. 6 times 34. 6 times 4 is 24. So I put a little 2. 6 times 3 is 18 plus 2 is 20. And I can see when I subtract this that I get a value of 0. So I have nothing left over, so I know that's the end of my problem. So in answer to this question, 8 84/100 divided by 3 4/10, my answer is 2 6/10. Now sometimes it works out that it doesn't go in evenly right away, and there are ways we can deal with that. So here's what I want to start off showing you, okay? First of all, when the problem is written like this, we first need to think about how do we write it in a way that we can do our long division. And remember that whatever is in front, that is your dividend. That goes inside your bracket. Whatever comes second, that's what you're dividing by. That goes outside your bracket. And so we set up our problem like this so that we can easily do our long division. Now our next step, remember, we can't have a decimal outside, so we need to make this a whole number. And when we multiply this by 1 power of 10, it moves my decimal point one place, which means I multiply my inside by 10, and it'll also move my decimal point one place. So that my answer is going to go over here. And now we're ready to start our division. So 78 divided by 24 goes in 3 times. 3 times 4 is 12, and 3 times 2 is 6, plus 1 is 7. So 24 times 3 is 72. I'm going to subtract these two amounts, and I get 6. Now before we would have just put remainder 6, but when we have decimals, we don't do remainders. What I need to do is figure out how I can keep dividing without changing this number at all. And here's what I want to show you. Okay, if you look at this last step, it says you may need to add zeros to the end of the dividend to get the problem to divide evenly. So here's what I want to show you. If you look at this problem, here I have 7 8/10. 7 8/10 is equivalent to 7 80/100. I can add a 0 to the end here, and it doesn't change my place value at all. And 7 80/100 is the same as 7 800,000. So if I want to keep dividing this to make sure that I get the right answer, all I do now is add a 0 at the end of my decimal point, and then I can bring it down. So I'm not left with 6 anymore. I now have 60. 60 is divided by 24 2 times. 2 times 24 gives me 48, and now I'm ready to subtract. When I subtract 60 minus 48, I get 12. Well, again, this is a remainder, and we don't deal with remainders when we do division with decimals, so I need to add another 0. I can add as many zeros as I need to get these problems to end. And what will happen is you'll either get it to end, where you subtract and you get a value of 0, or all of a sudden your decimal points up here will start to repeat, and then you can stop because you have a repeating decimal. Or you may get to a point where you're going to be rounding if the problem tells you to round to the tenths or something like that. Or you may find out that it doesn't repeat, it doesn't terminate, it's a special value like pi, which just goes on and on forever, and then you'll just stop. Okay? But for here, for what we're doing, if I add this 0 and bring it down, I now have a value of 120. Well, 120 can be divided by 24, and that'll go in 5 times. 5 times 4 is 20. 5 times 2 is 10, plus 2 is 12. And when I subtract that, now I get a 0. So since this is a 0, there's no remainders, and there's nothing else to bring down, I know that's the end of my problem.